Welcome everyone to Alberta Prosperity Project's Sherwood Park chapter, our 12th open meeting over the last 2 years. My name is Ross Hill. I'm the regional leader for Strathcona County region, the region of Alberta Prosperity Project. For our agenda today, let's go through that. I'll start by sharing a bit about who we are. We've got some new faces here, so I'll explain a bit about who we are and what we do. Then I'll introduce Donald. He's our keynote speaker, and he'll talk for about 45 to 50 minutes. This will be followed by a 15-minute break. There are rules over this open meeting. To leave the room during the 15-minute break, you have to buy one of the books that are here on the table. Okay, where else are we? After the break, we'll have a question and answer period with Donald. And if time permits, we can just have an open discussion about what we know about what's going on in Alberta and the world, because there's lots going on. So if there's time, chance to vent at the end. I'm going to then close the evening with a few final comments, and I'll be guided by my provincial leader, Pauline, as I try and do that. Okay, let's talk about the Alberta Prosperity Project. For those of you unfamiliar with us, we're an educational initiative focused on garnering support for a future where Alberta determines its destiny, ensuring prosperity and freedom for future generations. Our mission is to educate, inspire, and unite all Albertans, including businesses, organizations, people, anyone, on the rationale, merits, and benefits of Alberta's sovereignty, as well as alleviate any concerns they may have about Alberta's sovereignty. Now, what does Alberta's sovereignty mean? Well, pragmatically, freedom from persecution, whether that's political, economic, culturally, from the main perpetrators, typically the federal government, the United Kingdom, Europe, China, the World Economic Forum, and the United Nations, including the World Health Organization. So freedom means freedom from persecution from those particular organizations in general. Our goals: holding a referendum on Alberta's sovereignty, making Alberta strong, free, and sovereign, creating an Alberta that has the power to uphold its sovereignty, and creating a constitution, the Constitution of Alberta, for and with Albertans. Now, with respect to what we've been recently doing, our CEO, Mitch Silvestri, and one of our founders, Dr. Dennis Modry, they've been traveling around the province, and over the last couple of months, they've conducted over 60 town hall events. So they are seriously busy. I'm just going to give you some of the numbers for some of the more recent ones. And one number in particular I find amusing. They had 20% of the very small Albertan town attend, so that's a nice number. Anyway, Foremost Alberta, they had 109 attendees. Blackfalds, 70. Raymond, Alberta, 294. Cremona, 182. Stettler, 77. Pincher Creek, 224. Blairmore, 121. High River, 203. Devon, 248. Fowler, Alberta, 202, which is 20% of the population. And Grand Prairie, they had 328. Yeah, that's pretty impressive. They're getting more and more people. And typically, they always ask people, is this your first APP meeting? And they're getting about 30 to 50% new people. So it's good to see these numbers. Now, looking forward, we have an incredibly important event, the Rise Up Alberta event at the legislature. Who here has not heard of that? I thought so. Good group. All we can ask is that you please be there. United we stand, divided we fall. If that means you have to wear sun hat, glasses, whatever, just please be there. Yeah, yes. Well, yeah, there's a new strain coming out, you know. New strain of COVID. And did you see the chemtrails today? I bet there is a new strain of COVID. Anyway, that's another conspiracy. Anyway, I'd now like to introduce our guest speaker. He is an Albertan, a public speaker, and author. He holds degrees in economics and education. His most recent books are The Way Forward and What the Hell is Going On? Both of these books address the global march toward totalitarianism and what can be done about it. Here to speak about Alberta Independence, Secession is Not Enough, the eclectic Donald Lee. Donald, over to you.
Thank you very much, Ross, and thank all of you for coming. You guys are so well behaved. You know, it's like you're on a movie set and the director doesn't have to even say, "Quiet on the set." Oh well, I've been spending the summer with my youngest son and his family. He's got 4 kids, and the youngest is 5, and so when the kids are there, it's never quiet. I've kind of forgotten those years since I'm old now and don't have little kids running around my feet most of the time anymore. At any rate, my friends, thank you so much for coming this evening. It's a joy to be together with you and to share some ideas with you. And that's what I'll be doing, is sharing ideas. Some you will agree with, some you'll likely disagree with. Some will be correct, some are likely incorrect. As with all ideas, take what you can use and leave the rest. And keep in mind that every one of us has a point of view that has been substantially shaped by propaganda and by gaslighting and by various cultural biases. All of us are working with imperfect and incomplete information. And we're laboring under multiple layers of psychological operations, all of which is exhausting and causes our understanding to often be misunderstanding. Tonight, I will be talking about Alberta Independence, of course, but many of the ideas I'll be sharing are likely very different from the kinds of ideas you're used to hearing. But before I do that, let me tell you a little bit about myself. I'm sure many of you are wondering who this white-haired, hippie-looking guy is and why you should listen to him. I was indeed a little bit of a hippie in my younger years. I caught the tail end of the hippie movement in the early 1970s. And I was really into music and into my school band program in what at that time was the small town of Fort Saskatchewan. And I decided I wanted to become a musician. And so I planned to make a career, went off to university. But after 1 year at university in a music program, I realized that I might be able to make a career in music, but not a living. One time, a friend of mine said, "Hey, Don, how are a musician and a large pizza the same?" I said, I don't know. He said, "Both can almost feed a family of 4. So I dropped out of music and cast about for something else to do with my life. And I tried several things and several different jobs, and eventually ended up taking a job with a local fertilizer company. Some of you might remember the name of Sherwood Fertilizers. But this was just temporary, just for a few months. Well, I got a little bit of money together to go off and do something great and exciting with my life. Maybe some of you have done things like that in your life, something temporary. It's amazing how long temporary things can last sometimes, like the temporary income tax of 1917. Well, for me, a few months turned into almost 2 decades in the fertilizer business here in Western Canada. I did lots of jobs. I started as a laborer. I moved into process operations, got my third-class power engineering ticket. I went back to university. I was actually technically a full-time student for 4 years at the U of A while I was still working full-time shift work at the plant and trying to be a full-time husband and father. But eventually I got a degree in economics, and then I got a job in fertilizer marketing, and later on in our fertilizer new products research group. But in 1999, the company went through a restructuring and I was laid off. So I decided to return to music, my first love. I went back to university, got a second job in education, and right about the turn of the century, I became a newly minted band director. And again, I spent almost 2 decades as a teacher and a band director, mostly in Alberta. And in 2019, I retired from teaching to start what I consider my third career as a spiritual author and speaker. I had started writing down some of those things that happen when you're working with kids. We sometimes call them teachable moments. The little kind of interesting or sometimes tragic incidents with kids. And I turned these little stories into modern-day parables. At the end of 2019, I published my first book, The Band Director's Lessons About Life. And many of you can see that picture. That's me, really, it is, with my pre-COVID haircut. We used to think BC stood for before Christ, but now it's before COVID, so that's me with my BC haircut. The clean-cut businessman look I had for most of my adult life until COVID came along and they shut down everything, including the haircutting joints. And you know how it is when you're used to having your hair a certain way for a long time, and it gets a little longer than that, and it starts to bug you. Well, believe it or not, it was touching my ears, and it was driving me nuts. I was mad for about 2 weeks, and finally I decided, why am I going through life mad? Like, if they won't let me get my hair cut, piss on them. I won't cut my hair. I'll let it grow. I won't cut my hair till we get freedom back. So it's still growing. But the Band Director's Lessons About Life is a little bit like a Chicken Soup for the Soul book. There's 50 little parables. Each one's about 3 pages long. Each one starts out with a story that happened in school. And then there's a reflection section that draws a spiritual lesson out of the events of the story. So there's a parable about love and a parable about forgiveness and about perseverance, etc. 50 little parables. And I followed that up with another in the same series, the Band Director's Pocket Guide to Spiritual Growth. Doesn't quite fit in most pockets, but if you have a big pocket, it fits in there. I tried to make it small. And in fact, next month I'll be publishing the third in the series. It's a study guide to go along with the Book of Parables. It will eventually, or essentially turn the Book of Parables into a year-long course in spiritual development. So, at the beginning of 2020, I set about to sell the book because I'm not famous. I've been stuck in a classroom for 2 decades. So I found that as long as I could go around and talk to people about my book, I could sell some of them. So in January and February of 2020, I had a few book launch events at various places in Alberta and book signings in bookstores and that sort of thing. Then in March 2020, I was just in the middle of planning a cross-Canada book selling tour when the whole world shut down. And I thought, this is the flu. What the hell is going on? I was left with 1,000 copies of my book in the basement and a $10,000 Visa bill I couldn't pay. And so, unbeknownst to me at that moment, that eventually became the title of this book, What the Hell is Going On? And the subtitle is The Web of Fraud That is Enslaving Everyone and How We Can Escape to Freedom. And I spent a good part of 2023 traveling across Canada and speaking to various freedom groups about ideas from this book. And as I did that, many people said to me things like, we're tired of talking about the problems, we want to talk about the solutions. So that winter, I sat down and put together a book of solutions. The Way Forward, How to Escape the Totalitarian Control of the New World Order and Heal from its trauma. Because COVID traumatized all of us. And if you're open to perceiving things that way, we continue to be traumatized by various things. There's a lot of mass trauma going on quite intentionally. So that was my second. I spent 2024, the summer of 2024, the better part of 2024 actually, again traveling across Canada on a big speaking and book tour talking about ideas from the way forward. And I'm telling you this because the ideas from these two recent books are relevant to the discussion of Alberta independence. In The Way Forward, I explain the three types of warfare that are being used against us: psychological warfare, spiritual warfare, and fifth-generation warfare, and how we can sensibly respond on those three levels of body, mind, and soul. And I think that our way forward can be described as a journey of awareness and transformation. The first step is awareness, to understand what's really going on, the nature of the warfare being used against us, and what responses might be sensible for us. The second step is to transform ourselves and our communities. Now, this might seem strange, and you might logically ask, why transform ourselves? But think of it this way. In a typical war, our goal is to destroy the enemy's forces. That is, to transform our enemy in such a way that he can no longer threaten us. But in this war, that's not possible. We cannot transform our adversary. We must transform ourselves in such a way that our adversary can no longer threaten us. This requires a whole new way of thinking. But if we want things to change, it begins with changing our minds. Most freedom people accept that there is a war going on, but not everyone does. What I have to say may challenge some of your beliefs. I encourage you to try to keep an open mind. I'm sure you've encountered the problem of closed minds during the past few years. Everyone thinks that Alberta independence is a political issue. That's only a little bit true. When we look at Canada, and when we look around the world, we see political decisions that just don't make any sense. And that's because we don't understand what's really going on. What's really going on is not politics, it is war. Until we are willing to accept and to understand that this is war, we will never solve our problems. If you do not understand a problem, You cannot solve it. So please begin by understanding that our problem is war. It's confusing because nobody's dropping bombs on us. What's going on is what the Chinese call unrestricted warfare. The Americans call it fifth-generation warfare. I call it war is everything. Everything is war. Nobody is using guns, but everything else has been weaponized. That's what unrestricted warfare is all about. That's what China is doing. That's what the deep state is doing. Have no doubt about this. We are experiencing a war of the totalitarian deep state against all of humanity. And what we see happening here in Alberta today is happening everywhere in the world. And we have the opportunity to not only create something beautiful here in Alberta, but to also be a beacon of light to the whole world. If you want to have any hope of success in war, you must understand the strategy, tactics, and weapons being used against you. And you must understand what strategy, tactics, and weapons you can use in your own defense. That's exactly what I wrote about in The Way Forward. We must also understand that we are not really fighting Ottawa. The COVID campaign proved, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that policies are being made at some level above the level of national governments. Justin Trudeau is not behind this. Lord knows he's not smart enough. Mark Carney is not behind this. These people are just fronts for the people or the forces behind them. We are, in fact, not fighting against people at all. Our battle is not against people, but against ideas, and by extension, against ideologies. There are many ways in which this war is being fought, many facets of unrestricted warfare. This evening, I'll discuss only one of these, the structures in our society, or what we also call social structures, including government structures. All the structures of our society have been weaponized against us. And this war is being conducted through the very structures of government and all social structures that we thought were democratic. But they have all been corrupted and turned into tools of dictatorship. We need to create a new form and structure of government. And when we change our form and structure of government, this war will be over. Our adversary will have lost all its power. That's part of why I say that in this war, we win not by attacking anything or anyone, but by creating. Our adversary is using our existing forms and structures of government, and not only governments, but every social structure in Western society. All of these exist as top-down structures of power and control. All of them have been captured and weaponized. All of them are functioning, not democratically, but dictatorially. We have the form of democracy, but we have functional dictatorships. We cannot win this war simply by separating Alberta into a new country with the same form and structure of government. Our provincial government is already captured and controlled, just like all the other provincial and municipal governments. These are already acting as dictatorships. Here's another interesting point to ponder. There has been a separatist movement in Alberta for all of my adult life. It has almost always been ignored by the mainstream media. Have you ever asked yourself, why is the mainstream media paying attention to Alberta independence now, when it never has before? Yes, the polls are showing that it's more popular now. But I think the main reason is that now the deep state is ready to play this card. They want to destroy Canada. In fact, they must destroy Canada and every other nation state. Let me explain. We know that the deep state, or whoever is behind this war, wants to create a one-world dictatorship. This is not theory. This is history. It's in their own documents and statements. If you are not yet willing to accept this, then please read my book, What the Hell is Going On? Now, if you want to create a one-world totalitarian government or an empire, you must destroy nation states. These two concepts cannot coexist. This is an old principle of empire building. The Assyrians did it, for example, to the northern 10 tribes of Israel in 722 BC. The Incas did it to their conquered peoples. The English did it. That's what the Highland clearances were all about in the late 1700s. It's not enough to defeat the Scottish army on the battlefield. You must completely erase Scotland as a nation state, as a concept in the minds of people. And this is what today's migrations are all about. It was explained in a famous 2014 essay titled Strategic Engineered Migrations as a Weapon of War. That's exactly what they are. When you dilute a population by as little as 30% with people from a completely different culture, that population ceases to function as a nation. The nations of Europe functionally no longer exist. And the same is coming to Canada and the United States. The deep state plans to destroy all these nations. It must, in its psychopathic bid for world control. That's why the mainstream media is now focusing on Alberta independence. It's time to play this card. Our federal government and its media lackeys have spent decades alienating and slowly squeezing Alberta into rebellion. The conditions are now ripe. Enough people are mad, and Mark Carney will push us over the edge. You may have heard of John Carpe's recent comments about current federal legislation. He said that Canada might become a police state by Christmas. Our only hope to regain our freedom is to separate from Canada. When I said that political decisions don't make any sense, think about the climate change fraud and all of the completely nonsensical decisions that stem from that. The federal government has spent at least the last 2 decades constantly trying to destroy the energy industry in Canada. The energy industry is Canada's largest and most profitable industry, not just Alberta's. It's the largest and most important industry in the whole country. How could anyone possibly think you could help a country by destroying its most important industry? A child could figure this out. As you've heard, no doubt, many times in the last 5 years, this is too stupid to be stupid. Destroying your most important national industry is such political insanity that it makes no sense at all if you look at this simply through the lens of politics. But when you understand that this is war, things begin to make sense. This is a war of our own governments against the very people they're meant to govern. And when we look around the world and see nonsensical and insane political decisions everywhere, we have to realize that this is all the same war. So far, it has been fifth-generation warfare everywhere, with seemingly separate and isolated cases of kinetic warfare. But the war in Ukraine is not a separate regional event. Nor was the war to destroy and take over Syria. Nor is the war of Israel against the Palestinians in Gaza a separate war. in Yemen, in Iran, in the coming war in Taiwan. Everywhere in the world, these outbreaks of violence are all part of the same war. And now, our political leaders are taking it to a kinetic World War III everywhere. No one in the world wants another world war, except our political leaders. This isn't how democracy works. This is how dictatorship works. It looks like the US will be giving long-range Tomahawk missiles to the Ukrainians. These can strike targets deep inside Russia, and they can carry nuclear warheads. The Russians have correctly pointed out that when faced with incoming Tomahawk missiles, they cannot tell whether this is a nuclear or a non-nuclear attack. Should they respond with nuclear or non-nuclear weapons? This is insanity. You may not yet realize, but Europe is rearming itself for war with Russia. Almost all the EU nations have reinstituted the draft. In Germany, it's up to age 60. They're drafting 60-year-old men into the German army today. The new Wehrmacht. Yeah, and Germany is desperately converting its dying automobile industry over to produce war material. As ridiculous as it seems, NATO is going to war with Russia. And Mark Carney wants to tie Canada more closely to the sinking ship that is Europe. He will drag us into the coming insane war with Russia, and our young men will be sent off to be senselessly slaughtered in another European exercise in suicidal stupidity. It's all part of the same war. It's World War III, and it started a long time ago. And everywhere in the world, we see countries coming apart at the seams. It's not just Canada. This is intentional. This is planned. This is fifth-generation warfare. Serbia is having massive demonstrations against its government. Ireland is having massive demonstrations against its government. Iran, which you may not have heard about, has also been having the largest demonstrations against its government in the history of this regime. Nepal recently overthrew its government. A couple years ago, it was Sri Lanka that did the same thing and stormed the presidential palace and burnt it down. Demonstrations throughout the European Union countries, demonstrations in Canada and the United States and South Korea and Kenya. Everywhere in the world, there are massive public demonstrations against governments. All this social unrest is part of the same war. The fentanyl war that China has been waging against the West is part of the same war. The terrorism, almost all of which is false flag terrorism conducted by the CIA and other intelligence agencies, is part of the same war. The fake pandemics and the fake vaccines are part of the same war. The transgendering of our youth is part of the same war. It is a war of the totalitarian one world order against the common people everywhere, and is being conducted through our own governments and other social structures. That's how fifth-generation warfare works. We unwittingly destroy ourselves. So today, many Albertans are calling for Alberta independence because they realize we are being attacked by our own federal government. But once again, most people don't understand the problem and thus don't understand the solution. Independence from what? Our federal government doesn't really control anything. Parliament no longer makes public policy. Just look at the recent decision to increase Canada's defense spending to 5% of GDP. Who made that policy decision? That important decision should be made in Parliament if we had a functioning democracy. But no, that decision was made by NATO. Why? Why is NATO deciding Canadian fiscal policy? And who controls NATO anyway? This is just one example out of hundreds that shows how our government is not controlled by the people we elect. It is controlled by some power above it. And this is true of all our governments. Almost all municipalities in Canada are taking policy direction from the UN, from sustainable development, from the IPCC and the WHO. Not from you and me who vote for these municipal politicians. Independence from Ottawa means nothing. Independence from Ottawa will simply replace the Ottawa tyranny with an Edmonton tyranny. Canada will break apart into several smaller states that will be even easier to control from above, and the very concept of nationhood will disappear from Canada. That will be a victory for the deep state, and Albertans will gain nothing. The deep state has its tentacles in every government, but small ones are easier to control than large ones. And once you divide a nation into regions, those regions no longer have whatever unity came from the concept of the nation state. Canada will be much easier to control once they've split it into a dozen pieces. This is the deep state strategy. If we simply secede from Canada, we will play exactly into the deep state's hand. So, secession alone is not nearly enough. And secession alone will merely hasten the downfall of Alberta and Canada. It is the form and structure of government itself that needs to change. It needs to become democratic. Well, everyone thinks we have democracy, but as I've explained, we have the form of democracy, but all our structures have been captured. This is step 2 of the communist subversion strategy. These structures are being controlled from somewhere above, and they are functioning as dictatorships. The fact that we periodically vote for our dictators is meaningless. It does not turn our governments into democracies. They are simply dictatorships with rotating leadership that is controlled by something or someone at a higher unseen level. Therefore, the solution to our problem is much more fundamental. We must rethink and recreate democracy. I say we need 1776 thinking. At that time, the American colonists were living under a tyrannical king. They wanted out from under this tyranny. But they realized that they couldn't just set up a new monarchy in America to replace the old monarchy in England. That wouldn't solve the problem. They needed to create a new form and structure of government that would guarantee liberty and that could not be corrupted. They did a very good job. The founding documents of the United States of America created a form and structure of government that was new and unique in the world. But now we find that even this has been corrupted. We must begin again. We must learn from the past and once again create a form and structure of government that will be immune to corruption and tyranny. We need governance that is not top-down. We need bottom-up structures. For example, here in Alberta, all municipalities are legally creations of the provincial government through the Municipal Government Act. In fact, the new Bill 50, the provincial government is taking even more power away from municipalities and onto itself. This is part of the long and ongoing process of consolidating ever more power at higher and higher levels of government. This is part of how our governments have gradually become more centralized and more dictatorial. Our new structures and principles of government need to begin with the sovereign individual, then the sovereign family, then the sovereign community. freedom and responsibility need to be pushed down to the lowest levels possible. That means personal freedom and personal responsibility. And this is where most Canadians will rebel at the very idea. The majority of Canadians want to be taken care of by government. This was succinctly expressed in a recent message from David Parker. He wrote, "Here is the dark truth. Most Canadians would rather be comfortable than free. They would rather feel safe than be sovereign. Just look at how people scream at the thought of losing their government pension, at the thought of losing their government Medicare, at the thought of losing their welfare or unemployment insurance. None of these programs are actually the responsibility of any level of government. These are all individual responsibilities. We have forgotten, or perhaps never learned, that freedom and responsibility are two sides of the same coin. You cannot have one without having the other, and you cannot lose one without losing the other. No one took our freedoms. We gave them away when we gave away our responsibilities. My friends, take them back. Freedom is never given, it is taken. This is exactly why I say that we must first transform ourselves as individuals before we can transform our communities and our nation. I'm reminded of the prophetic words of Ludwig von Mises, the greatest economist of the 20th century. Almost a century ago, he wrote, "The fate of civilization rests upon the ideas that motivate the masses. If we fail to win the battle of ideas, we will see the horrors of history repeated." Today, the ridiculous and pernicious ideas of the Frankfurt School philosophers have permeated our culture to the point that almost everyone holds socialist ideas without even knowing it. This is exactly what cultural Marxism is all about. Today, most Canadians do not want responsibility. They are terrified at the prospect of personal freedom and personal responsibility. The fact that the vast majority of people will never willingly accept this responsibility is what will prevent our ultimate victory in this war. We will be defeated, and most of us massacred, unless we are able to convince our brothers and sisters of the seriousness of the war we are in. Our brothers and sisters need to understand that unless we make the choice between responsibility and death, we will get death by default. Your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to start a real and serious discussion about the form and structure of government, not simply about Alberta independence. If Alberta secedes and retains its present structure of government, it will be a deep state victory. Alberta must secede, yes, but at the same time, we must restructure government. In fact, all of society to become truly democratic. The deep state does not fear any existing nation state because these have already been infiltrated and controlled. But the deep state does fear true democracy. Only democracy will defeat their dictatorship. Once power is not centralized, it cannot be monopolized, and people cannot be controlled. Our future lies in the decentralization of all power. If we fail to do that, we have no future. Also, and this is very important, and a completely unknown idea, democracy cannot exist without honesty. As Alexander Solzhenitsyn famously said, socialism is a system of lies. We are in a war against totalitarian deep state lies. This is the truth that many people are unwilling to accept, and even more are unwilling to speak. Many Canadians think that Danielle Smith is standing up for Alberta and standing up for freedom and democracy. Yet neither she nor any other politician has the courage to speak the obvious truths of today. That COVID was a military campaign. That the injections are not vaccines, but biological weapons. That our media is complete propaganda. That our governments are conducting psychological warfare against us and fifth-generation warfare against us. That smart cities are open-air prisons. That they are bringing in the digital ID and the digital currency to control us, which is exactly why Mark Carney has started the process to make cash illegal. That the false flag terrorist attacks are staged to get us to go along with the militarization of the police and the loss of all of our constitutional rights. That the destruction of our energy industry is intended to impoverish millions of Canadians, destroy the Canadian economy, and push us into desperation so we will accept the universal basic income, which will make everyone dependent upon the government and thus enslaved by the government. That we are, in fact, in the midst of World War III, a global war conducted against all humanity through our own governments for the purpose of enslaving all humanity under the totalitarian control of a tiny cabal of psychopaths. Democracy requires honesty because people cannot make wise decisions based on lies. And democracy requires courage because what good is freedom of speech if you don't have the courage to speak the truth? We must begin with honesty about everything. We will never recreate democracy unless we are willing to be honest about our situation. Everyone seems to fear honesty because we will be labeled conspiracy theorists or some other nasty label. My friends, do we fear name-calling more than we fear death? Recall that I said the way forward is a journey of awareness and transformation. We need to understand the problems we face and what the sensible solutions might be. And then we need to transform ourselves and our communities. Please understand that our fate is in our hands. We create our destiny. There are no saviors, for every savior is a tyrant in disguise. The way forward is not through great personalities, but through great principles. Our task is not to destroy or attack anything or anyone, but to create. As we transform ourselves, we need to create a new archetype of human existence. And as we transform our communities, we need to create a new paradigm of social organization. The great psychologist Carl Jung taught his understanding of archetypes. These are universal, inborn models of behavior and personality that influence all of us from our subconscious minds. For example, the dominant archetypes of the mature masculine are the warrior, the king, the magician, and the lover. But we need to move beyond these to a new archetype, the responsible cosmic citizen archetype. This is what we need to become, what we need to transform ourselves into. I have identified what I think are the 4 most important characteristics of this new archetype. Number 1, a focus on personal responsibility instead of a reliance on outside authority. Number 2, a focus on cooperation with others instead of competition with others. Number 3, a focus on the consciousness of love instead of the consciousness of power. And number 4, a focus of activity on service to others instead of service to self. This is what we need to manifest in our own lives. This is our personal transformation. As I've mentioned, we also need to create a new structure of government, a bottom-up structure of governance. We need to recognize that the basic unit of sovereignty is the individual, then the family, then the community. Higher levels of government need to be restricted in their ability to impinge upon the sovereignty of the lower levels. Responsibility needs to be pushed down as far as possible. Maximize responsibility to maximize freedom. Here are 4 principles that we could use as we go about creating new structures of government. Number 1, every man and woman owns their own mind, body, soul, and property. Number 2, no one shall use fraud or force in his dealings with others. Number 3, the basic unit of sovereignty and responsibility is the individual person. All power and sovereignty stem from the individual. And number 4, individuals delegate power to governments. They do not lose these powers. The way forward is through transforming ourselves into the new archetype of human existence and transforming our communities into the new paradigm of human interaction. Each one of us must do this. There can be no saviors. All of the problems we face in our world today and the war being conducted against us through our own governments are the result of the concentration of power. As Lord Acton famously quipped, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. We complain that our leaders are corrupt. Of course they are. We have given them power. The solution is not to replace the leaders, but to remove the power. Whether or not J.R.R. Tolkien intended it or realized it, his great story, The Lord of the Rings, has a message for our time. It is a story about power. Recall that it was the ring of power itself that was dangerous, because power destroys whoever uses it. Anyone who possesses that much power becomes a tyrant. It's unavoidable because it is power over others and interferes with the free will of others. This is fundamentally against God and thus fundamentally evil. Spiritual growth is always about power over self, not power over others. And that's why the way forward involves a personal transformation, leading to power over oneself and allowing others free to exercise their own free will. This is what that strange scene with Galadriel, the elf queen, is all about. Frodo offers her the ring of power. Naturally, she desires it. All of us desire power, just like we desire the other things of the material world. But Galadriel is able to resist this desire. She controls herself and masters her desire for power. Then she gives Frodo a visual image of the horrific tyrant she would become if she accepted the ring of power. And it terrifies Frodo. Thus, there can be no saviors in this war, because anyone with the power to save you has the power to oppress you, and will do so. You must save yourself. No one is coming to save us. Not Donald Trump, not Pierre Poilievre, not Danielle Smith, not the Galactic Federation. and not even Jesus. Too many Christians think that all they need to do is sit on their hands and wait for the skies to open up and Jesus to come and save them. No, you must act. God has placed the tools of salvation into your hands. You must act. God has no hands in the world but yours. If you are still expecting a Savior, physical, political, or spiritual, I ask you, why was it not Aragorn, the rightful heir to the kingdom of men, who carried the ring? Why was it not Elrond, the lord of the elves, possessing mystical powers and having successfully battled Sauron before, who carried the ring? Why was it not Gandalf or Saruman, the gray wizard or the white wizard, who possessed knowledge of and power over the unseen forces, who carried the ring? Each of these great figures were potential saviors in the story. Yet the inhabitants of Middle Earth finally came to realize that there are no saviors. Each was called upon to transform themselves and, through cooperation with others, to transform their community. It was the littlest and weakest of all the creatures of Middle Earth, a lowly hobbit who carried the ring. And you may also recall the prophetic words of Galadriel, who told Frodo, "This task was appointed to you, Frodo of the Shire. If you do not find a way, no one will." And so I say to each one of you, my dear friends, this task was appointed to you. If you do not find a way, no one will. Godspeed, my friends.
Okay, a bit of a letdown now because we have a 15-minute break. You probably have a bazillion questions, but there's probably biological needs as well. So we're going to take a 15-minute break, and then we'll be wide open for Q&A. Only one condition: you can't leave the room unless you buy a book. Okay, anyway, we'll take 15 minutes. That leaves us 7:40. We'll reconvene for Q&A. Okay, we've covered a ton in that presentation. There's politics, there's spirituality, there's you've been given free choice. What are you going to do? That sort of thing. Does anyone have a question they wouldn't mind asking Donald?
I'd like to clarify that I may or may not be able to answer your questions, but I'm always happy to entertain questions.
And also, I also like it to look at this as an open discussion. We call this an open meeting. It's not an event that, like at a Gore where you get 300. This is meant to be a bit of a meeting as well. So if you have a question and it's something that Donald doesn't have an answer for, or it's beyond, or you want to just discuss it, if someone has an answer they want to propose, that's fine as well. So, does anyone have a question for Donald?
Hi, Donald. Nice to see you again. I first met you in Victoria. I just wanted
And
to-
you're stalking me, right? You've
I'm
followed me here.
totally stalking you. I think you follow me. Anyway, I just wanted to make the statement that you did say, I'm probably misquoting you, that Jesus was not going to save us. I do disagree with that. But Jesus also wants us to stand up and fight the satanic forces that are attacking us, that are attacking the world. Because Jesus, God parted the Red Sea, but the people had to walk through it. So we must also be prayer warriors.
Donald?
I'm well aware of the difficulty of language. And as I did say at that point, that I frequently run into Christians who think they don't have to do anything. And that's a problem. Because we do have to do something. Yeah.
I don't know much about scripture, but isn't there supposed to be something about false saviors? People false prophet. Yeah. Yeah. So again, it comes down to our free choice, I think. So, question?
You had said earlier that we all have to act, and you were talking about pensions. How is a person supposed to start acting now? I see mostly gray hairs around here, or I think they call them Arctic blondes.
Yeah, this is very difficult, and the governments have got themselves into a big problem, and we have got all of ourselves into a big problem too. In the what the hell's going on? I tried to have one chapter for each fraud. There's roughly a dozen different frauds that I touch on in that book. A couple of them I had to. The chapters just got too long. But I do have a chapter on the financial and currency fraud. And governments all over the world are in an impossible situation. They have made commitments, particularly to old people, that there just isn't money. Like the money isn't there. I don't know the exact state right now of the Canada Pension Plan. Around the world, it's one of the better ones. But the Canada Pension Plan has never been a pension. Yes, there is a fund and there's billions of dollars in it, but it's fundamentally a social program. It takes money away from people who are working and gives it to people who are not working. And when it started in, I don't know, the 1960s somewhere, I don't remember the date, there was something like 30 or 40 people working for every one retired. Well, the situation in Canada now is there's about 3 people working for every one retired. And if nothing changes in the demographics, that's going to become 2 people working for every one retired. This is not sustainable, which always kind of bugged me, with a somewhat of a background in economics. And when this term sustainable development started to be tossed around some decades ago, I thought, what are they talking about? The most unsustainable thing in the world is government spending. Like that's what we need to be concerned about, the sustainability of. So all of our social programs are unsustainable. And I talk in that chapter about the financial and currency collapse. Have been experiencing what people have called the everything bubble, right? There's a bubble in everything. Real estate's in a bubble. It's unaffordable. It's ridiculous, the cost of real estate. The stock market's in the bubble. Highest valuations or very near the highest valuations ever. Right? Every asset class is in a bubble except gold and silver, still not in a bubble. So like this bubble is going to pop. And I realized with a book I quote in there too, it's called Princes of the Yen. It's a book, and also there's a documentary. You can find it on YouTube for free, I think. Documentary made from the book that explains, some of you, well, maybe all of us are old enough to, well, maybe not quite all of us are old enough to remember the huge run up in the Japanese markets in the 1980s, and then the collapse of the Japanese stock market and the collapse of Japanese real estate market. At its peak, the total value of all the real estate in Tokyo exceeded the value of all the rest of the world's real estate combined. That's how bad the real estate bubble was. And when it popped, I mean, it wiped out so many people. So in Princes of the Yen, the author goes through and explains how this was not an accident. This was carefully planned. And the same thing is happening now. These bubbles that happen kind of once a generation are the way one of the ways in which these ultra-rich families consolidate their wealth and power periodically. And unfortunately, no matter what we do, has nothing to do with Alberta separation or not, but no matter what we do, those of us who are old and receiving pensions, the coming decade or two is going to be very tough on us, however it works out when these bubbles pop.
That's interesting, because if you took responsibility for your pension and did an RRSP, when the bubble pops, that's not going to help you much either. So, yeah.
So you have to be very careful about what assets you're holding as a store of value, because that's what, right, any kind of a savings or private pension plan, so we're going to save, right, money in some kind of a store of value, so that when we reach the age that we either cannot work anymore or don't want to work anymore, we can then draw down that savings to live on. But yeah, you have to have that savings in some asset or some form. Oh, that's right. Yeah. Yep.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Do you want to?
Yeah, for those who are listening on the live stream, the lady was just mentioning that our currency is also being devalued. Absolutely. And they knew that in also the same chapter in What the Hell's Going On. You know, this was a complete fraud when, for example, the chairman of the Federal Reserve of the United States, inflation started picking up in late 2021 and throughout 2022. He said, oh, this is just temporary. This is utter nonsense. That he knew it wasn't temporary. He knew what caused it. They caused it, starting actually in the fall of 2019. And so I go back to September of 2019, when how many people heard about the liquidity crisis in September of 2019? A few, not many, right? This is what started it. And that's when the money printing really started, was in the fall in response to the liquidity crisis. And once again, we're having financial institutions fail. There was two, what were they now? Anyway, just last week in the news, the United States, I think they were auto lending. Does anybody know? Anybody remember? I think they were like subprime auto lenders. You know, you don't have to have a job, you don't have to have any credit, but we'll lend you money so you can buy the car. Yeah, the automobile industry is the next one to crash because of the abuse of subprime loans to people. Yeah, they're ridiculously expensive.
I just had a thought combining, I think in the Great Depression, the assets people had was land and family. So you could grow your food, you had your cows, you had your chickens, you had your assets. They weren't financial, they weren't taken from you. You took responsibility for your food and unfortunately the system has worked that out of most people's lives on purpose, I would think, just so you're dependent.
Yeah.
Do we have any other questions? Well, we got tons now, so here first.
I loved your talk.
Thank you.
It really worked. You had mentioned personal responsibility, and you talked about the personal responsibility, and the pension plans and everything else. It was a big Ponzi scheme. You all got taken. Now it's our personal responsibility to now figure out how we're going to handle it. It's as simple as all of that. We've been all taken all along. There's nothing we can do. There may not be pensions money that we put into this. Now it's just going to throw the question out there. How are you personally going to deal with it? And that's where we need to start to figure out how we're going to save ourselves individually.
In the context of community and in the way forward, I talk about that. Right? The bulk of the way forward looks at the three kinds of warfare and how to respond, right? Psychological warfare, spiritual warfare, and fifth generation warfare. And we're not going to survive on our own. We're going to survive as part of a community. And so we need to be strengthening whatever community we're part of or building new communities. But yeah, and those of us who are, at least many retired people in the room here, regardless of our age, I think everybody needs to be giving some thought to, how, in what ways can I provide a service that would be valuable to other people? And not, it doesn't need to be reimbursed with money, right? They're going to take our money away anyway, probably. But that doesn't mean we can't continue to use it within a community, right? We need some... cash is very handy because it's so divisible, right? It's an important characteristic of any useful money. So, I think regardless of what your age is, all of us have skills that we can put to use. So many retired people volunteer almost every day. Okay, well, maybe the time may well come when we're going to need to say, I need some kind of can we exchange something, right? I just made an arrangement. I fulfilled my half of it. I don't know that a lady who does live blood analysis, and not a lot of people like wild game, but she does. So I just dropped her off about 6 or 8 goose breasts, and she's going to do a live blood analysis for me. So there's lots of little things that we can do, and it doesn't necessarily have to be 100% of our income either. I mean, at any age, think about if you had half of your income in some form that was not taxable. This is it. You would probably, for most ordinary people, would reduce their tax payable to 0. So, we can do barter, we can do exchange. If your barter is not reportable for tax purposes, if you are using silver or gold coins, these exchanges are not reportable for tax purposes. So there's ways that we can still legally exchange value, use skills and knowledge and stuff that we have to help support ourselves at any age. So there's things, and everybody has different skills, and everybody needs to think about it in their own situation and then within their own community and develop communities. It's one of the things I did in the last several years, talking to freedom groups all across Canada, trying to encourage them to strengthen your community, build those bonds, figure out what do you guys want to do in your community. There's all kinds of freedom communities. Some of them are into growing and storing food. There's all kinds of things. Well, it doesn't have to be a commune, but Get in the mic.
What I was leading to was that it's first our personal development
Yeah.
we have to deal with, and how can I share my skills with the community? Because the government cannot put a value on my ability. They can put a value on my dollars, but not on my ability.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Thank you for that speech. It was very good, informative. I'm especially intrigued with the archetype, and I'm familiar with the ones you listed, and the new one that you've proposed. If you could tell me a little bit more about it. I did not get the complete title, and I'm just wondering.
The responsible cosmic citizen.
Okay, and is that something that you've conceived yourself? Is that
No, I
something
didn't.
Okay, I'm
Yeah,
wondering
very
where
little.
it originated.
Very little came out of.
And if I could just have a moment to write that down.
Yeah, sure. Responsible.
I am intrigued with it, and my phone is on airplane mode, by the way. I'm just doing a Samsung Note here. Responsible.
Citizen. Yeah. Actually, if you're interested, there's a series of books that may sound a little bit too far out there for most people, but what's the first one? Green is the guy's last name. Now I need more than that. What's his first name? Anyway, it's in the end notes of The Way Forward. Yeah. So the lady's asking about the characteristics that I've outlined. George Green, pretty sure George Green. Interesting backstory to that. Won't go into it right now, but nonetheless, the books don't say anything much about the author or where these came from. But he has that name, Responsible Cosmic Citizen. I started thinking, okay, what would that mean? He leaves it in the book that, people all over the world need to start thinking about these things and work them out on for themselves, that all of this has to come from people. And we don't need the same solution in Sherwood Park that they have in Drayton Valley or in Timbuktu or in London or in Paris, right? Every community can address the issues of your community and your culture and whatever in your own way. And this is exactly, one of the reasons why this totalitarianism doesn't work, because they try to have one solution fits all everywhere all the time. And it doesn't work because people are different. So come up with your own solutions to your own problems, and there'll be better solutions than the government can ever come up with. But anyway, if you look at the back, you don't have to buy a book, but, you got one there. Yeah, look in the back. I can't remember. I'll find it for you if you need help finding it in the end notes.
Okay. Yeah. Remember, if you want to leave the room, you do have to buy a book. Okay. Vicki?
That's what Ross said. I just want to extend the same thank you that has already been. It certainly has been interesting knowledge, and the depth and the level of understanding you've given us. I really thank you for that. So now that the dollar is going to be devalued, and we're seeing that, just a small step at a time. So what do we do with our GICs and with our investments and that are, locked in, locked up? What do we do with those?
Well, I've been suggesting since What the Hell is Going On came out 3 years ago, that the only assets that I see anywhere in the world that are still undervalued are precious metals. No, you can hold precious metals in your GICs. Yeah, in many forms. The best is to have physical gold and silver coins in your possession, but I don't think you can do that in an RSP. But you can hold the exchange traded funds. That's SLV for silver and GLD for gold. You can hold the miners, gold and silver miners. They're making money hand over fist right now. And actually the the share prices of the gold and silver miners have not gone up that much. So they're taking off this week? Okay.
Remember, this is not professional financial advice. See your
I'm
own.
not a financial advisor. If you saw my financial track record, you would definitely say, no, you're not a financial advisor. Yes, sir.
So I like the idea of this developing the skill set. That's a really good idea because each of us, especially those of us in the trades, we have lots to offer. So there are now, I've noticed, I've been kind of watching this a little bit, there are barter sites now where you can, the big thing with barter, the weak spot of barter is how to find somebody that you can trade with. Trade a skill for, say, something they have and vice versa. But there are now websites I see coming up that you just put in your skill or your whatever it is you're offering, and somebody else can look at it and say, oh, this guy's got 3 turkeys or whatever, and I got a couple pigs. I want some turkeys, so they exchange them. So that's something to watch for, right? So it's it's really I concur with the metals thing. The silver has gone up in the last few weeks. It's almost 40%. The gold is going up, and the banksters, they're all moving out of whatever and into metals. So, and they say, and there's only so much metal in the world. So, it's a good point.
Yeah, on the point of barter, we sometimes tend to forget about things, but I'm trying to think. I think it was Dr. Larry Shepard from Fort Saskatchewan. Anybody ever bump into Doug? He's passed away now a long time ago. But I think it was Dr. Larry Shepard. Neighbor, like a few doors over here, his kids were the same age as us and stuff growing up. And I think it was Larry. When he first started out as a doctor, he was working in a remote town in northern Ontario. And this was before Medicare. So when did Medicare come in? 66, 65? Somewhere in that. So when he started as a doctor, there was no Medicare. People paid the doctor directly. Well, you get up into rural places, almost anywhere, especially northern Ontario, there's a lot of native people. Well, he had this one guy who never had any money, but he was an artist. He painted these goofy paintings. And so he'd always give Larry these paintings. And Larry ended up with a whole bunch of these damn paintings that he wasn't interested in at all. But later on, and I'm trying to think, Norval Morisot. Anybody know art? Morisot was kind of the first big name native artist. And his paintings later became like huge, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And Larry took these things as just junk, and stored them in his garage for years, not knowing what to do with them. And they later became, fabulously expensive. So you never know. I mean, we might come to the point where, hey, can you do my gallbladder, doc? I got a good inventory of books. Maybe we can exchange some, take care of all your Christmas presents next year or whatever. Might come to that.
And I was just thinking, the barter business, you don't need a website. You could be the local community's barter area.
Yeah.
You track who's got what to trade and can connect people. So that's how.
And one of the ones, I think it's an Alberta-based one. I think if you want to look this up, I think it's called Barter It. Does that name ring a bell with anybody who's been looking into these things? Yeah, Barter It. I think that's in Alberta.
Any more questions? Yep.
Hi, Donald. Sorry for missing the first half of the presentation, but we'll try and be on time next time. Just wondering if you heard, I think it's Bill C8 that's going through in Parliament right now, that it's the one about where they'd be able to take away your ability to participate online, access online. Is it? I'm hearing 8 and 9.
Yeah.
I think it's 8.
Yeah, I think you have the number right, but it doesn't matter.
Yeah, whatever.
Yeah, the internet safety or whatever.
Yes.
Everything is for your safety. Yeah, right. Sure it is.
And I've recently had the opportunity to move back home with my parents and who subscribe to the Edmonton Journal. And the Journal was very explicit in saying, this only applies to businesses. This does not apply to individuals. Yeah. So then Matt, I believe the parliamentarian conservative Matt Strauss stood up in Parliament and just explained all of the downfalls of this bill. First of all, being that you would have no access online, and not only no access to the internet, that means banking, paying your bills, utilities, etc. It's unbelievable. I was just wondering if you'd heard about that and if you have any opinion on that, besides the fact that it's a disaster.
Oh, besides it, it's not besides. I mean, nothing in addition to. Yeah, it's a disaster. I mean, it's to be expected. I mean, probably all of us in the room here have known for a while. This is coming. They've been telling us for years. This is coming. They've been telling us for years. The digital ID is coming. The digital passport is coming. Right? If you don't, the vaccine passport is coming. I think it was the fall of 2023, but I could be wrong. When at the G20 meeting in Indonesia, I think it was in that year, all the G20 nations agreed that they were going to bring in the vaccine passport. There will come a time when you cannot cross international boundaries. You cannot get on an airplane or a ship unless you produce the digital vaccine passport. No, they may have delayed it, but not saved us. Yeah, not saved us. Yeah, they tell us these things and nobody believes it until it happens. And here with the Online Harms Act, is that what they call it? That name kind of popped into my head. Yeah, harm. Yeah, right. Thanks. Somehow we survived the last 25 years of internet. You know. Anyway, you know, and the funny thing about harms, I don't know what you guys are like on your face. I don't follow Facebook very much, but you know what? Like I've been shadow banned a little bit. I got warnings and stuff on Facebook. I try to talk about my books on Facebook, and then I get complaints and all this kind of stuff. And yet, you know what? Hardly a week goes by that I don't get some kind of a friend request from some scantily clad thing. I don't even know if it's a real person or not. It's an obvious porn site. Like, I don't know. Sunshine Sue wants to be your friend. Yeah, you know, yeah, sure she does. Like, you know, like Facebook could stop this. Like if they can stop me trying to flog a book for whatever, they can stop online porn, but they don't want to. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So one other thing about internet access, what do they call it? Cryptocurrency? If you can't get access to the internet, how do you deal with your cryptocurrency or BitChute or privacy?
Well, that's the nice thing about having gold and silver coins in your possession. And yeah, crypto it's interesting, but I don't like.
How do you get access?
It's something I think a risky ride, and you might make a bunch of money, but don't plan on it making it a long-term investment, I would say.
Or getting access to it when you need it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the fact that happened in Spain, right? Was that a year ago? The big electricity crisis in Spain? Was it the spring? Whenever it happened, yeah. I mean, the big power outage, ATMs wouldn't work, people couldn't get online, they couldn't, yeah. So some cash in your house, in your pocket? Yes.
To expand Roger's point is that, for instance, what he's saying is that this will potentially affect business, like myself, who's running a business. I think that, and many content creators are running their podcasts as a business, like an actual. They have a business number and everything. So you think that will affect more? It's kind of designed for content creators more than the average Joe, isn't it?
What the Online Harms Act? Oh, it's gonna get everybody. It's a dragnet. It's going to cover everybody. It will grab all of these things. This is how you've seen this happen over the years, right? Oh, this is only like the temporary income tax. It was only going to be for millionaires, right? Yeah, that didn't last very long, and these things kind of creep in gradually. Oh, it's only like what was the restriction on Carney's restriction on cash? The $10,000. Yeah, so you can't make any cash transaction more than $10,000. Well, then once they bring that in, then they just move the number down. Then next time it'll be, well, $8,000. We're finding that people are, have found a loophole in this law because they're doing 2 transactions of $8,000 each. Right, so we're going to move it down to 7,500, and then we're going to move down to 5,000, and then we're going to. Well, you know what? It's incrementalism. That's how they do it. So the Online Harms Act is just kind of the opening salvo in controlling your access to the internet and everything online. And for a lot of people, that this is now important for our business lives and our economic lives. Yeah, control.
I just wanted to ask about Nepal and how about they were shut down with their internet. They weren't allowed to share or have good information. So they took over their government and, blew everything up kind of thing. And
Just burned
it. And so the same thing happened in Sri Lanka a couple of years ago. And I don't think we've heard about Sri Lanka since. So what has happened in Sri Lanka and Nepal?
Yeah, well, since then, I don't know. But in Nepal, yeah, that was just a spontaneous people's uprising. And what's the guy's name? The name might come to me. But a war reporter, probably the best war reporter in the world, goes all over the world. He went to Nepal right after that, talked to people and stuff like that. And, yeah, it was something like that. The government got more and more concerned that people were objecting to what the government was doing, and people were kind of posting things on a certain social media app. Like it wasn't Facebook or something. It was some kind of a local social media application there. And so, yeah, the government shut that down. And the thing is that it shut down the internet, that a lot of people, that was their income. Especially like in Nepal, the tourist industry is a really big industry, right? So foreigners who come there would send money, the payment for their hiking tours to K2 or whatever it was, right? And so you shut down the internet, you shut off a lot of people's livelihood. And yeah, they just kind of went crazy and marched into the parliament buildings and burned them down and burned down businesses that were owned by, government people, because it's small as a cabal, right? It's a small group of people that controlled all the power in Nepal, controlled the government, controlled the key businesses. Yeah, doesn't that sound familiar? and Nepal is small enough, and I think half the population lives in Kathmandu. So, almost everybody knew who the people are. They know who the families are. So, yeah, they just went out, burned their places, and beat the crap out of them if they caught him in the streets. And then the finance minister had his clothes ripped off him, and he was running naked in the streets, and they threw him into a river naked, and yeah, whatever. So, and the president fled the country, and the government collapsed. And you see, these things are happening everywhere. We don't hear most of it, of course. Yes, supplementary question. I don't know what happened in Sri Lanka. I actually haven't heard anything since
I
that
think
happened.
3 million people died.
You say 3 million people died in Sri Lanka. This was going back about 2 years, I think, right? And died from what? Like, did the army turn against the people? Do you know more?
I believe it was actually starvation. They put in a green energy policy, so no one was using fertilizer.
Destroyed their agriculture. Yeah, they followed exactly what the UN Sustainable Development wanted them to do. Yeah, so it's a really good idea that all our municipalities are following exactly the new zoning and laws and stuff that Sustainable Development wants. And you see how the Sustainable Development plans for increased densities of housing. See how that's working out in Toronto. Do you ever see any of the Angry Mortgage Broker podcast? He uses lots of foul language, but yeah, he tells it like it is. Like the condo market in Toronto is absolutely collapsing. These are unsaleable. And there's like hundreds of thousands of more being completed this year. And it's just a disaster. And the same thing is happening in Vancouver. And now it's beginning to happen in Calgary, I hear.
One last question, then we'll do a wrap up.
Real estate markets are very, very slow moving. Some of you will remember what happened to Alberta real estate in the 1980s. All right? My wife and I bought our first house when we got married in 1983 in Fort Saskatchewan. I figured that prices had bottomed. Right? The peak was 81 or thereabouts. I don't remember exact. Okay? By 83, 2 years later, right? Prices had fallen tremendously, and I thought, okay, prices have bottomed. It's a good time for us to buy a house. They didn't bottom in 1983. They kept going down. In fact, we bought in 1983. Prices did not even start to come back until the 1990s. And Alberta suffered this real estate situation worse than the rest of Canada, I think, because it corresponded with an oil crash. Again, right? It was Papa Trudeau's oil crash. And one of my best buddies from high school he just retired in the last year, but he worked in the drilling industry his whole life. And then when Baby Trudeau came in and crashed the oil business again, then Ed was drilling up on the North Slope of Alaska for the last few years. And when I talked to him, he said, yeah, another Trudeau, another oil crash, and I got to go work outside of Canada again in the drilling business. So, yeah, prices didn't come back for probably 15 years in Alberta. If I remember correctly, we bought that house, our starter house. Remember that expression? We'll be in here for a few years, build up some equity, then we'll trade up to... We were in that house for 16 years. And we sold it, I think we bought it in 1983 for $72,000. And we sold it about 1996 or 90... No, it was 99. 1999, we sold that house, I think, for $94,000. So that's 16, 17 years. We moved into that house, and 2 weeks later, I got laid off. Took on, like, bigger mortgage, all the rest of it, and then you get laid off. Yeah, right. Life's like that. So sorry, yeah. Okay, we'll have your question. In that little digression there, but what I was trying to say is that the real estate collapse that we are just entering into in Canada, this could well not recover for our lifetimes. I've been telling people for the last couple of years that we may have seen the peak in real estate values for this century because it's very slow moving. This crash will take over a decade to unfold, I think. Question?
I don't actually have a question. I just have a statement that I know of a really good person who sells long guns. So if anybody wants to buy a gun, because you can't buy handguns anymore because they're banned.
Well, handguns always have been restricted for a long time, but yeah, now they're pretty much banned, yeah.
Okay. Darren did have his hand up before you, so that's why I said two. Okay, one more.
Okay, thanks, Ross. So it's interesting that you mentioned the CBDCs, the digital currencies. So this actually goes way back, like 2,000 years. So if I might take the liberty to quote Revelation 13:16 in the scripture, he causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, so that no man might buy or sell, save he that had the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. So this is coming, and it's in the scripture, it's in the writ. So it is on the future, and it most assuredly is going to happen. But what is our response, particularly if you're a believer, a Christian? You mentioned about derelict Christians that are not doing their duty, and I agree with you with that, by the way. We have a sacred duty to resist this. The scripture calls this whole organization, this whole plan, the mystery of iniquity. And it was operating in the Apostle Paul's time, and it's operating to this day. And we can see it's bursting at the seams to get let out of its cage. The only thing that's holding it back is the Spirit of God through Jesus Christ and his church, the born-again people. They're holding it back. They're not going to be able to get their mystery of iniquity until we're gone. Anyway, I just thought I would mention that.
Just one other thing about that, the idea, the mark of the beast and so on, the idea is, I think, you won't be able to do commerce unless you have your digital ID or whatever. So it's unless you have your own community to do commerce within on your own terms, yeah, you're going to be out of the system. You won't be able to buy or sell. Anyway, with that, we better wrap up. We're getting close to 8:30. Before we do, though, we're going to cut off the live stream, Max. But first, before we do that, let's give a round of applause for our speaker today, Donald. Thank you very much, Donald. No one can leave till they get a book. Max, are we off the air now?